so on. Oh, thank you, whoever did that. Thanks. And then we did the nice framework, and we gave you a nice breakdown of the framework and all the controls associated with each framework and so on. So, if you didn't take the course, that's what we covered, right? And then really the heart of it. Here are all the different roles and responsibilities and laid that out and who should be in each role and responsibility. And again, I created this so the companies in our area that are taking our workshop at Moraine would have a really clean cut, easy way to follow through what the program's all about, how it works, all the key kind of concepts that they needed to be aware of, right? So that's why we basically created this and where it came from and so on. And then here was the heart of the course. So the heart of the course basically broke down, the three levels and then the required documents or tools, if you want to call them documents or tools that are required to get through level three, right? And in the last course, we basically walked you through these tools, right? So we went in and talked about what, if we go to a level one, we talked about what an asset inventory categorization report's all about, right? And then a maintenance report. And then we went in and gave you the details with it, and then actually showed you one that we created with help from some of our local partners, right? So some of our local business partners, we went in and helped them actually build something like this, right? Well, of course, we can't use the information from those partners, right? So we had to basically generate fictitious information to use this, right? To use this tool in class. So we created a case study. So what we basically did is took the four companies that we've been working with in our district, okay, and then I took information from each one of those based on, what we went. I mean, no private information, but just general information about, what this organization is made up of, who works for them, what type of work do they do, what kind of systems do they have, what are their cybersecurity controls and technologies that they use to control their environment and so on. And we built this full-blown HTML interactive tool that serves as their CMMC assessment, inventory, and categorization. And by the way, we've had a couple now going through the process that are using this, and they've given us great feedback. They're like, yeah. And by the way, they didn't use this one specifically, but something like this. Okay. But all this is spelled out. You don't have to guess at any of this. All this is laid out. If you go and look up in the CMMC documentation what the asset inventory and categorization report should look like, it's spelled out and it tells you, exactly what is required, right? So it gives you all the detail here, and that's what all this is basically. So you have to give the name of the organization, the location, how many employees, so on. I'm not going to go through all of this, but it spells all of these things out that you need to incorporate, right, in that report. The key personnel, and then the different categories of inventory, right? And then basically what we did is we created a little database that had each of these categories and had them then have the ability to add each one of their assets and document all of the information that's required in this document, right? And this is fully functional, so you can go in and edit in these. You can add a new asset and so on. And this was a way that they could now centrally on their website or on one of their systems generate this. And you could do this in HTML with React and JavaScript and so on, or you could just write an app that sits somewhere using Python or something like that. So there's no specific way you have to actually do this. They don't spell that out, right? But you can see that here are the CUI assets, which is required, the added security protection assets, the CRM A assets, the specialized assets, and then the out of scope assets. So those are exactly what are spelled out in the CMMC requirements. So when I build this using AI, it's really easy to do this because I can basically use all the information that's spelled directly out for me in what the requirements are for the program, right? And then all I have to do is implement it for that program. Okay. And then just some additional information like the data flow network architecture and the compliance asset summary. These are all things that are spelled out that have to be in this document. Okay. Any questions on that? So the key thing that you need to know is that we created this for a training purpose, not for commercial use, right? What we would prefer you do is you teach, your organizations how to build their own or hire someone to come in and build their own, but they could see what these tools look like and how they might be used in preparing for an audit. And it's more than that, they're required. So this is a required document or tool that's needed for both the self-assessment level and the third-party assessor. Okay. Any questions on that? All right. So to go further, then what we did is we said in a training environment, if you're going to use this, and that's what this course is supposed to be for, by the way. When Insight funds us to do this, the idea is that you might want to offer a class or just a module or a portion of a class on compliance and specifically maybe CMMC. We do at our college. This is in our information security management course. We have 3 days just on CMMC, and we have them literally go through like an audit like this, right? And we are now using these tools in that class. Okay. Well, what we do for the class then is that we create a case study. Okay. And then the case study can be used throughout that class and then with all of the tools that we're going to generate. And the real beauty of this then is you can actually see that in real life, you wouldn't create a case study, right? If you were working with a company to do this, you would create maybe a corporate profile. I would call it a corporate profile. I wouldn't call it a case study, right? That you would identify all the critical information about that organization that you're going to need in filling out the different forms and documents and so on. Okay, so we're going to start the class first by showing you how to build a case study. And then I'm going to show you one, and then Yuri's done. Actually, I've done a couple of them, and Yuri's done a couple of them. So we'll just show you how we create something like that, and that you can easily just create something just as easy and detailed as you want to do. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. Okay. And by the way, when we talk about these tools and documents, there's 9 of them that are required, right? And if you went through the class, you now know you have to have your system security plan, your plan of action and milestones, your asset inventory and categorization report, your security assessment report, your incident response report, your access control matrix, your audit log and monitoring report, your configuration management plan, your vulnerability scanning, a scan report, your supplier performance risk system compliance score, and then your maintenance report. So those are all the required documents that you have to have in doing both the self-assessment and then ultimately the third-party assessment. Okay. Any questions on that? We're not going to do all of these. That's not what we're going to do here. We're not going to build all of these in this class. So just to make it, we're going to show you some examples of some of these. Okay. If you try to build one of these and you're having some issues, let me know. But you'll see the process how we did it, and you should be able to easily do some of these by yourself. Okay. All right. Um, no questions. I'm going to go on to creating the case study then. Okay. So if we go into the course and you go into modules, what we wanted to do first of all was to show you how to create a case study. Okay. So here is one that I created. I'll just start off with this one. Okay, so I created the case study and by the way, I even told AI to give me a catchy title that sounds legitimate for a company, right? So in this case, it created a case study called the Patriot Defense Systems Incorporated. Sounds good, right? I like it. It works. There's no, I checked, there's no specific company like this in this location that has this. So, but anyhow, what I went through and did was to have it build like a company profile that I can then use to populate all of those tools that you need for the CMMC audit. Okay, so you get the idea. You want to build this case study first, and then you could use this case study throughout like your cybersecurity management course. Do any of you currently use case studies?
Yeah, we use case studies in some of our classes.
Okay. Okay. And so there are two kinds of case studies, right? There are real case studies where you're taking a real corporate event or situation and you're having your class analyze that situation and make decisions, how might they made different decisions or what were the weak points or whatever you're studying, right? Or how did they properly or improperly implement controls, things like that, right? So that's one type of case study. The other type of case study is just totally fictitious, where you're just giving them a case and you're saying, okay, we're going to use this fake organization to now act as if it's a real organization and go through this process. And that's what we do in our course, all right? Only because, a lot of organizations don't want their information used in an exercise like this, right? So we just felt in our situation, in our faculty at my school, that it was better just to create our own fictitious companies, and that's how we would do our threaded case studies throughout the class. Okay. And I can tell you, we get a lot of really good feedback from our students with the use of these case studies because it shows them, instead of just talking about these things theoretically, they could see how they could take a real organization and perform some of these tasks and create tools and do different things in a simulated real organization's environment, right? Okay, so when you create this case study, what you might want to do is look at what are the requirements in each of these 9 tools. So I sort of started with that, right? And by the way, you can have AI do that. You can have AI basically, you can start off by saying, all right, I want to set the tone for what I'm going to have you create here. So do a search of the 9 tools that are required for the CMMC audit process, certification process, and the type of information that's required in each one of those tools. And I did that, by the way, and it gives you a great list of stuff. It's really sort of nice, right? And then from there, you can go in and actually like build a case study. But we'll build one right. We're just not going to use the one we built. We'll try to build one right now and actually do it live. Okay. But basically, what we did in here is that we defined specific details and characteristics of a corporation here. So, what I did is I took 4 companies in our district. I looked at, things like what's their annual revenue, how many employees do they have, what clearance levels do they have, who's their primary DoD contract with, things like that. I looked at like what are the officers' titles and so on, and what type of officers do they have involved with their CMMC project. So you can see like a CEO and a chief operations officer, chief financial officer, CISO, and CISO. So those are individuals that you would definitely probably want to identify in the report, and that you can make up titles and stuff for, right? Okay. Um, and then a general description of their contract. Well, I'm not going to do that with the 4 companies in our district. They don't want us to do that. That's the whole point of CUI, right? We don't want that information out there. So we know what each of those 4 companies do, and they vary. I mean, some are in food processing and packaging for DoD, right? Other ones make parts for military vehicles or helicopters or whatever, right? Others are things like textiles, right? Textile services and so on. So we have a wide variety of organizations in our district that have DoD contracts that need CMMC assistance, but they're not just like building tanks or helicopters or whatever. They're all types of services and products and so on. Okay. When I have it build a case study, I just pick out one and I'll tell it what I want it to be a contract for. And again, since we're just making these up, it doesn't matter, right? Um, and then, we would have their facilities, right? So in this case, I just decided to make this in Texas. We had just come back from a Texas trip. We taught a class in El Paso, and I know there's a big, base in El Paso, Fort Bliss. So I'm like, all right, let's make this El Paso, right? And we'll have some of their facilities in the Dallas Fort Worth area. And then, of course, we'll have some type of comm center in Washington, D.C., where they negotiate and try to get contracts and work with their federal partners and so on. So I just made this up, right? I just went in and said, okay, we're going to have 6 facilities, make up the addresses for me. So none of these are real addresses, they're fictitious addresses or whatever. I told it what I wanted each one of the facilities to be, right? And then I had it basically, build those facilities for me. Okay. Um, then I went into the DoD contract itself, and I had it like analyze what are typical DoD contracts look like, whatever, and what might be a variety of contracts that a company might have in this area. And it just made these up for me, right? So, which I'm fine with. In some cases, I went in and changed them because they just didn't look right or whatever, right? So I made some changes to this and so on. But you can see, this particular company is making parts for like the Abram tank. Since we were at Fort Bliss and whatever, I thought that might be a good idea for this one. Okay. But these were different contracts. So they're making a particular part for an Abrams tank here. And then there's a modernization contract for the electrical systems. And then the Bradley fighting vehicle, they have a contract for precision machine transmission components and drive shaft and so on. So I had AI help me build these, and I'll show you how to do this in a little bit. Okay. Um, and then the level of security, the CUI security that's involved with each one of these contracts. Okay. Um, so that was the contract information. Then I wanted to go in and actually build their facilities, right? Well, I already talked about how many facilities they had, right? So we got these 6 different facilities across the country and so on. So now let's start to go in and build, how many domain controllers and how many file servers and database servers and apps and I tried to use our companies in our district to make it, somewhat more realistic. I wanted to make sure that it was not just IT, but also incorporated OT stuff, right? So I said specifically make sure that we incorporate some OT equipment and things that need to be protected as well. So you can see, we have an operational technology manufacturing side here as well. So the Plano facility has CMMC vertical machining center, a FANUC industry robot, and so on, right? And then you can see the San Antonio facility. We've got some CNC machinery, some robotics and welding robotics, industry presses, so on, and you get the general idea with it, right? Any type of cloud services that we might want to use. So in this case, I wanted to make it a mixed bag. I was like, let's say that that they've got their own private cloud using, Microsoft services. They're using AWS and let's say Azure, just to give students have more than one thing they have to work on. They're not just going to focus on AWS because they have to take an AWS class in our program and they have to take an Azure class in our program, right? So why not tie them all into like the case study so they leverage all the things that they've learned in our program, right? So I did that more student facing than the company realistic, facing when we built this. Okay. Um, and then, where some of the equipment was located. Okay. So, just to, to give it some realistic ideas of where the information was located. Then I went into the network and operation technology side of it. So because, again, if you look at the reports and what are required and so on, you have to have like your network segmentation. That's in one of the reports it requires how is your network segmented? What do the VPN, the VLANs look like? What do your wireless networks look like and so on, right? So I wanted to incorporate that because you're going to need that when you're having students complete these forms and so on, right? So, I had to create different VLANs and what type of operations and things existed on each of the VLANs. Okay, so you can see that there. Then, some of the other equipment that the organization would use. So you can see that they had an SEM Splunk Enterprise system. I put in IDS IPS. We used Cisco IPS IDS systems. Vulnerability scanning, we're using Tenable, Nessus, the common products that are out there, right? And in you can make this any way you want. What I'd recommend you do is you probably align these to what you're teaching in your classes, right? So it makes sense when your students are going through a case study that they've used some of these products and they understand what you're talking about. Okay. And that's again pretty much how I did ours, right? And then compliance and risk. Um, So just went in and talked about that their top compliance risk is, they're part of the supply chain and the CMMC flow down requirements, legacy manufacturing issues. There's a lot of things in the CMMC and OT side that are not going to be up to requirements in many cases because some of the older systems don't have some of the technologies available for things like authorization and controls and so on. So there may be legacy equipment that might pose some issues that they need to identify, right? And then incident response. Testing frequent gaps. IR plans need more tabletop validation. So I just came up with a couple. But I only wanted to do a couple because later in the class, students are going to add to this. So they're going to add significantly as they start to go through the process and identify new things, right? So that was the idea behind that one. And then there's an instructor mode here that I can go in and actually now change things and stuff too. Okay. But I made this so it would meet the requirements of the class. Okay. Um, so that's the case study, and I thought, maybe we create a case study here, live to show you how to do one of these. Um, and just wanted to see if there was one other thing in here that I should touch on. And I guess that's it. So, okay. All right. So let me show you how I built this one. And I'm not going to go into great detail like I did when I built mine because that's going to require you to sit down with your classes and identify some of those things, right? But let's just go ahead and start one and show you how you might go about building one of these, right? So I'm going to use a Word document to do this. All right, so I'm going to go in and create a new Word document, and we'll call this case study design. All right, and I will bring this over and just show you how to start building. Actually, I'll just switch screens here. I think that might be even easier. So, okay. So, and I'm going to use either, I'll probably just use Gemini, but you could also use AI Studio Gemini. I've been using that more and more. Like if you're going to build the whole thing that we did, you probably want to use Studio. If you're just going to build the case study by itself, the standalone case study by itself, I would probably just use Gemini, or you could use Perplexity or ChatGPT or Claude. Our team has become much more Google centric only because they are just making unbelievable strides and their stuff just it's caught up to Claude as far as looking really good and it's surpassed both Claude and ChatGPT in the integration of all their tools and the ease of how to use their tools. Okay, so we're gonna build this prompt to build a case study for a new company, and I'll walk you through what the steps are and what kind of things you're gonna want in the prompt and so on. Okay. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to set the scope of what AI needs to know to do a good job at doing these. Right.
John, you need to switch your screen. We're still seeing the
Okay.
browser.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and then we'll switch our screen and go to it.
Dạ vậy tao tức nhau nhau
Um,
live.
um,
Okay. All right. So you see, I just got a Word document open. That's, nothing fancy here, right? So to set the scope, I'm basically going to say research the DoD CMMC program, identify the 9 tools or documents that are used to prepare and pass both a self audit and um, third-party audit. Okay. So I wanted to do some analysis of that. And the beauty of doing this, by the way, now I could, and by the way, when I created mine, I did do some of this. I actually took my tools and just uploaded my tools. And by the way, you can do it a lot of different ways. So I could do it this way. So I could say, use the following tools um, in constructing knowledge of the program. Okay, and here's what I could do. I could just go in. Oh, I should say constructing. Okay, what I could basically do now is I'm going to go to my GitHub. Okay, and I'm going to go to that page for CMMC that we created. Okay, and I'll show you this here in a second. So yeah, I've already showed you the one that earlier, but we'll go here. And since I've already got this in my GitHub, I can just send it to this page. Okay. And I could literally say, look at each one of these documents and incorporate the information for these, right? Because I already had it go in uh, um, and analyze some of this in building those tools, right? So, okay. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to basically say I'll go into each tool. I think it's that way it doesn't have to like press buttons and all those types of things, right? So I'll just go in and the way I could do it is just say, here are the URLs. So here's the first URL, and then I can go back to the next one. And here's the second URL. And I'm not going to do all of them, but you get the idea. I'm just going to go to each one of these documents that are used. And why? Because then it's going to know what kind of information do I want, because these reports are going to require some data to do, right? So now this isn't realistic for all companies because all companies might not have all of these, but the point is if I'm going to use this in class, I want it to have information that they can complete each one of these documents with, right? So that's why I would do it this way. Okay, and I think that's enough for now. Okay. All right. And now what I'm going to say is I'm going to give it what I'm doing here. So I'm going to say I am a college cybersecurity professor teaching a security management oh, come on course. Um, um, and I'm going to say here that I need a case study that will be used by my students to um, complete a CMMC practice audit. Okay. I should say to prepare for, to and complete a CMMC audit. Okay. Um, and then I'll just say that the case study will need enough data, and I might want to say fictitious data for my students to complete or to use and complete Okay, so this is a lot of detail that it's going to get on its own and be able to prepare a really decent case study. Okay, so again, I'm having to research the DoD CMMC program, right? I'm having to identify the 9 tools, right? So I'm giving it 3 of them here. I'd probably give it all 9. Then I'm giving it the situation. So I'm a community college. Now, if you were doing this for a company, you would say I'm a company, and I mean you'd want to have it build the profile, not the case study, right? So I want to build a profile, and again, you would not want to do this in just an open LLM model. You would want a secure model or a sandbox to do this in, right? Because do not want to take the chance of sharing this information outside the organization, right? So I make sure there's a security note here that you would either want this on your own local machine that you're going to process this through, or you would want it in a protected sandbox. Okay. All right. And then from here, um, I should say the case study. We'll need enough fictitious data for my students to use. So now I'm going to give it, so I'm going to say, um, make this company located in, let's say, St. Petersburg, Florida, since I'm there right now. All right. Um, and I'm going to say with, let's say, 5 locations. And I'll give the locations. I'll say that the corporate headquarters um, will be in, let's say, St. Petersburg. And we'll say that manufacturing site 1 um, will be in, let's say, Clearwater, Florida. All right. And we'll say the warehouse will be in Clearwater also. We'll say that the I'll just call it manufacturing site 2. We'll say that will be in Augusta, Georgia. Or wait, let me get another place in Georgia. How about Atlanta, Georgia? Yeah. Okay, and then we'll do one last one. I'll say we have one in Washington, D.C. So we'll say um, Com Center. I'll say Arlington, Virginia. Okay. All right. So we've got 5 centers now. I mean, I could have let it just pick them and whatever. Um, but but in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and get and then from there, I might want to put in how big the company is. So let's say the company um, has a net value, let's say 75 million. And we'll say it has 300 plus employees. And we'll say that they have, so we'll say we have 3 DoD contracts, and then we'll list what they are. So say the first one is for providing textiles and uniforms. I could spell here. All right. We'll say um, the second one, let's see, what do we want the second one to be? How about we say the second one will be like storage devices, including um, the duffel. So, come on. Infantry duffel bags and foot lockers. And what do we want to make the third one? So how about we make the third one how about headgear? All right. So um, something like that. Okay. But you can make anything you want. I'm just showing you the process I would go through, right? Okay. Um, and then I would say now I'm gonna have to go ahead and create the case study. Okay. So now I'm gonna say act as an expert cybersecurity trainer, create a visually appealing, highly interactive um, web page case study. Okay. Act as an expert cybersecurity trainer, create a visually appealing and highly interactive web page. I should say for the case study, for this case study. And then I'm going to give it some very specific tasks. I'm going to say, create a catchy and realistic organization name. Okay. Include a list of all cybersecurity and executive positions. Create fake addresses. Contract details. And a fully functional list of both IT and cybersecurity resources and OT equipment and resources. Something like that, right? Now I can go on. I could go on and on and on. You can see you could, and the thing is, once I create this, I can always go in and make it better, right? In fact, sometimes what I'll do is I'll create these, use it for class, and then modify it and use it again, but enhance it so it works better for class, right? Um, so now I'm going to give it some more detail. I'm going to say use HTML5 with embedded. Now I could say JavaScript, I could say Python. I could create in any environment I want, but I want this to be web-based so it's easier for students to access and so on, right? So I'm going to say use HTML5 with embedded JavaScript and Cascade style sheet so it looks really nice. Um, and I've already told you I want it highly interactive. I want it to look good and so on. And I could keep going and going and going if I wanted to, but this is just an example of what you might put in to building this case study. Okay. So I'm going to take this now and I'm going to go to Gemini. So I'll bring Gemini up. Okay. All right. And I'm going to go in and just basically paste in my prompt now. Okay. There it is. And I'll let it start thinking on this now. Now, I messed up. I should have done one more thing, right? What's the other thing I should have done? I should have said, if you have any questions, stop the thinking process and ask, right? So if it doesn't understand something, I should have it ask. Or I can say, do you understand this? And if not, ask a question, right? I usually, especially in a more complex project like this, it's a good idea to have AI come back and ask you things so it knows how to properly interpret things. All right. Any questions on this, on what I did up to this point? Any comments?
No, that's great, John, and thank you. And so once you create the HTML and JavaScript, then you deploy that on the canvas or
Yeah. So
on
I'm going to
the.
show you how to do it. We're going to show you how to actually do it. So we'll walk through this whole thing. But what I like about this, it shows you what it's going to do now. So it's walking through the process, right? And now it's starting to build this code. Look at the code it's building too. I mean, it would take you forever to do this thing, right? I mean, this is like having a team of developers there helping you build what you need to go through or to prepare for this class. Look at this. It found all 9 of them. So it knows what we needed. And here's what it's going to now specify for the case study. And I'm probably not going to be happy with what I get initially. Um, so let's see what we get. So I'm going to take this and I can test this by just going to a website, W3 School. If you want to copy that, I'll put this in chat. If you want to use this, you can use this just to test the website itself. I'll put this in chat real quick. Okay. So you can use this link to go in and chat. I mean, to test your code. All right. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to test the code. So I'm going to go back here, grab the code, go back to my website here and paste it in. And let's see what it looks like. All right, so here we go. And I mean, what I really like about Gemini and once you get into using AI Studio, it's even way better, right? But it makes things look very official, very well laid out, right? So you can see here, and if I don't like something here, I just change it, right? But here it's got, so attention to system contains CUI, controlled information, so on, all right? Talks about the mission of the organization, the contracts. Okay, so you can see it took what I gave it and built pretty good on it so far. The site architecture, personnel organization chart, and look, it made up all of these titles, and then equipment, and then auditing tools, and so on. Now, I might want more things there, right? Like I might say, okay, this is pretty good for a first run, but let's say, I mean, I could get really crazy, right? And I could go back and say, um, just so you know, I'll say, create um, a um, fake list of all employees with titles and um, uh, um, and let's say location of employment, right? And in addition, I could say create a full-blown list of equipment and assets that will contain CUI and FCI. And I mean, it won't always work, but why not try it, right? And then I'll say incorporate this into the case study. Okay, so there we go. So now we're adding a lot more information. So we're adding all the employees, where they work, and so on. And now we're going to add a lot more meat as far as equipment and assets, right? The part that amazes me is how fast this thing does it. It is amazing. It would take you forever to create these lists and do this, right? Here we go. What I really like about this, it gives like real I mean, you can do real task in your class then, because you can say, go to make the HR director, the owner of this asset. You can start now. When you do that asset inventory, you can now apply specific ownership to each of the assets, right? Data ownership to the assets, or you can decide who should be the custodians for these, right? Who's the data custodian for each of these, and so on. But look how fast it builds this stuff. And then, the other thing I could do here is I could also say, make this tool editable so I can add new assets and new people, right? So I could add that as well. But let's see what we come up with first. All right, so here we go. Let's take this one. Let's see what it looks like now. So we'll go back here. We'll update this, get rid of the old code, put the new code in. All right, now look what we got. Okay. And look what we got for assets now. And I can now expand this and so on, right? So I might go back now and say that. I might go back and say, um, looks great. Um, add the ability to add, remove, and edit personnel and assets, right? And let's see what we get now. So it's going to take that same tool and add a little more functionality to it, right? So it's taking the original code and now it's just modifying that code to add those things. Now we are starting to expand where we're going to go with some of this. We're going to use more advanced coding, like we're getting more into things like React and so on, and mobile databases and stuff like that. But for a basic case study, this really works well in a class. And then we'll show how to deploy this next. All right, so it's still building here. Believe it or not, when you have it go in and let you edit, it's a really significant rewrite of the code. There we go. Okay. So now we go in and let's try it again. All right. So now you can see we can add employees. So if I click this, I can put all the new stuff for employees in here, right? I can go in and edit or delete any of these. I can do the same thing now for my assets. I could have done the same thing for locations and stuff. Let's say we had a new location or just all the corporate information. I could have done the same thing. And I could just basically continue to go and add more information that I want in this case study. So you can see like the one I did previously, I added a lot more to it, right? I mean, it was probably an hour or two I worked on building the case study, right? But you get the general idea how you go about creating one of these, right? Any questions on this? We want to share how to deploy it next, right? So how do you deploy this next? All right. Do all of you know how to use GitHub?
Yes.
Okay. So all I'm going to do basically now is I'm going to take this code. Oh, um, so I'll take the code, copy it right here. And now I'm going to bring my GitHub over. Okay. So here's my GitHub. Okay. And I'll put this in CMMC. So I'm in a CMMC repository. So you have to have a repository, right? You have to create a GitHub account. When you create the GitHub account, and by the way, we have um, an explanation of how to create the repository and how to do all of this. I'll add that to the class. It's in our AI class, but I'll add that link into this class. So if you don't know how to set up a GitHub page and how to do all this, I'll put the directions in there. It's pretty easy though. But you basically just go to GitHub, you create an account, and by the way, for educators, it's totally free, right? And then what you'd basically do is you're going to go into the repository where you want this. Okay, so I want it in my CMMC. I'm going to go to code and I'm going to add a new file. Oh, by the way, what did it call this company? I forgot what it called it. Let's see. It called it Tactical, Aegis Tactical, like the Aegis ship, huh? I'm ex-Navy guy, so Aegis. All right. So add a new file. So Aegis. How did they spell that again? I'm going to paste the code in first. All right. And then we'll name the file. So I'm just going to call it Aegis. So AEGIS. All right. AEGIS dot HTML. Okay. And now I just commit this change. Commit it here. And then you got to have a little patience because you are publishing this to a trackable repository. So it takes a little bit because it's going to look, are there any changes and so on. And it will let me, modify those changes and things like that later. Okay. But you'll see the files here. So there's the file. And all I have to do to see it is I can go to my published website here. To do that, you go to settings, pages. And now if it's your first time, you got to go down and you have to set the domains. You got to set the domain to main. So you got to go down and set this domain. It's already at main because I did it and save it. You want to make sure it's deployed as a branch. And then you have to wait for it to get published. All right. Well, mine's published. So here it is. And now I'll see what the page looks like. So I'll put it up here, type in the actual file, and there it is. There's my page. So this is a fully published website now, right? From GitHub. So I can copy this URL. All right. And I could, let's say, make it an iframe. So it looks really nice when I publish it in my class. So I'm going to go to, if anyone's familiar with iframe generator. Okay, this
Yes.
will create an iframe from a URL. So I'll put in my URL here and I'll put how wide. This is Aegis. Was it Tactical? Okay, that's the name of the company. I'm going to make it, let's say 1200 wide and 1200 height. I'm going to make it scrollable. And I'm not going to mess with the rest of this. And then I'll just go ahead and create a iframe. So generate the iframe. There's the iframe. And I can preview it. You can see what it looks like down here. So you can see it looks like the website. I can go ahead and copy that now. And now I can go to my course. So let's say we want to put it in this course here. So now we have a new case study. So this will be case study 5. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to add a page. Okay. And this page will be called case study 5. and I'll call it Aegis Tactical. And now I have another case study I can use for my class, right? So I'll create that and maybe move it up so it's under 4. I'll go in and edit it. You go to edit, and then you can do this 2 ways. You can just go to insert and embed, and you can just paste in the iframe. Or you can go to URL. I mean, you can go to the code here and paste in the iframe. You can do it either way. Okay. And then you want to save and publish it. And now it's actually a tool inside your course, and students don't have to leave your course to actually use this tool. Now they can use this tool right inside your course, right? So now we have another case study. Now this one's not really complete. There's a lot more I'd probably want to add to it, but I don't want to take the time to add all the different things because it's going to depend on what you want in the course, right? And you'll notice if you start to use these other tools with it, you're going to want to come back and add things over and over and over again because you're going to need new things to use the other tools. But you have a good base to start with. And the only thing I did not tell you how to do, oh shoot, um, was that you can make this a project, right? And now as you make more tools and stuff like that, it's interactive and it knows that it's part of an overall project, right? So in Claude, you'll see that there are projects right here. In ChatGPT, there's projects. In Gemini, there's not, but if I did this in AI Studio, which uses Gemini, there is a project. But normally, if you're going to do this for a class, you want to create it as a project. So now each of these pages you create are aware of each other, and they can pull data and have knowledge about all the things that you've generated for that class. Okay. But creating them in as a project is a smarter way to do it. So you just go in, you create the project, give the project a name. So you just say new, and like we would call this um, Aegis, let's say, okay. And then you'd paste in what you're trying to do here. So this is going to be case study and tools for my cybersecurity course. So you now know what it's for, what this is for. You create the project, and now you just paste in. You just, as if I was starting from scratch, I would take my original, and let's do it, by the way. Why not try it, right? Let's go back. I'll put what I put in the Gemini. So I'll go get my original prompt. Oh, I can just go to Word to get it, right? I'll just go to Word to get it. Here, I got my prompt, copy it, and now I don't have to use Gemini. I could easily have just used Claude or Perplexity or any of those, right? So um, here we go. I'm going to do it in Claude this time. So I'll go in Claude, paste it, have it go, and see what Claude comes up with. But just you get an idea. You don't have to use Gemini, but you will see Claude and ChatGPT will probably take longer. We've noticed that Gemini is much faster at doing a lot of this, and you don't run into running out of tokens as fast and so on if you're using the free or basic account. Okay, so now it's going to the 9 key documents. But what's really nice, it shows you its thinking process, what it's doing as it's going through and thinking and now generating. And let's see what we end up with this one. Any questions why this is generating?
So once you generate this, do you have your students complete the audit, or what do you do? How do you use that in classroom?
Yeah, so the next thing I would do then is I would start to create the auditing tools. That's what we're going to do next. And then I would have them use the audit tool with the case study.
Okay.
So they use that audit tool now to actually perform the audit. Make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let's see what we, it's still working in this. Okay. And we're going to try to create a couple of the tools too. You can see this is way slower than Gemini. I like Claude. If you're familiar with Cascade style sheets, you can do some really cool looking things. Claude it does a really good job of the design. It does not necessarily do as good of a job, I think, in the thinking process and the coordination of everything. Especially if you're using AI Studio, it is off the charts now. Its reasoning capability is just it just amazes me what it's able to do. It's almost unbelievable. This looks like it's doing pretty good work here, Dom. I'm impressed. It's taking a little longer than I thought, but it's doing a pretty good job. And by the way, if you do use two AI tools to do this, you can take the best ideas from both and sort of join them, you know? You can literally have one look at the other and incorporate, the ideas that you like, you know? Actually, this is doing a really good job. I'm really surprised at the depth it's going into. However, I think I used this to create that previous um, case study, so it might have learned from what I did in the previous one because I can see some of the things look like patterns of stuff I did in the previous one. So, and that's the beauty of these also. If you build, one case study after another, it learns from what it did in the previous one, and will add upon that, you know. And I don't know if you've used Claude, but Claude has this thing called artifacts. So we don't even have to paste this into W3. It will show us what the website looks like immediately. And by the way, Gemini would do the same thing if I did it using Canva. So Canvas, rather. You have to click on Canvas, and then I could have looked at the website right uh, um, in Gemini. I just forgot to do it. But you can see it's taking a significantly longer period of time to do this. I'm gonna run out of tokens, I have a feeling, because this thing is building a monster. So when Claude runs out of tokens, it will tell you, I'm running out of tokens. Do try to prompt me to finish this? And since we're on a weekend, it will probably finish it, but we'll see. This thing's huge. Holy cow. All right, see what it says here? This response pause because clause reached its max length of messages. So you can nudge it to try to finish. And we're on a weekend, so it will probably finish. Let's see. So I have to hit continue. Continue. Oh, it didn't finish up here though. Let's see. Oh, yeah, it didn't finish. Um, So I'd probably need to go in here and say finish. I wonder how many thousands of lines of code this was. It's got to be pretty significant. And by the way, if I close this, I'll probably see the code here. The only thing wrong with doing live demos is that sometimes they take a little more than longer than you think they're going to. Uh-oh, failed to edit. What's going on there? We got down a rat hole in this one. So if you hit something like this, you're normally better off just restarting it. So I'm not going to do it in this case, um, but this looks like we opened up a little rat hole for this one that we could be spend all afternoon on. So I'm going to go on. All right. And we'll just pause this one. There's no reason burning up all those tokens. All right. Um, but anyhow, um, those were the tools you use to actually publish it. And then it's published right in the page as a case study then. And you can navigate it. In this case, it was editable too. Okay. Um, let's see. All right. So the next thing that we want to do is I'm going to go back to the course now. So let me stop sharing and we'll share back on the other page. All right. So now that we have a case study, what we'd want to do is go in and actually now build. Um, uh-oh, did I bring the course over? I did. Damn it. That's right, because I added the page to this. Sorry. All right. That's not what I brought over. This is what I brought over. Okay. If we go back to modules, what we want to do from here, and by the way, Yuri's going to show you how he built some of his too. See, we've got a bunch of different case studies in here we showed you, but he'll give you a little demo of it as well, and then we'll go from there. Okay. Um, just a primer when you're building websites, hopefully you know what these three things are. If you're going to use a web page to do these. So HTML basically is the code, right, to actually build the web page itself. And then if you use these cascade style sheets, what that lets you do is make it look good. It formats it properly, gives you nice color schemes and things like that, right? And then the embedded JavaScript will give you activity and so on. And then later on, we could add things like React and other things that will let you access and develop with large databases and stuff. So, but those are the things that I use when building this. Okay. And then I gave you an example of um, structures and so on like that that you could pull from if you're actually uploading databases and stuff like that. Okay. All right. In this case, now what we want to do is let's go ahead and build a tool now. So I started with the basic tool. So we're going to build an asset inventory and categorization tool. All right. So to do that, what's the step in doing that? It's actually fairly easy, believe it or not. All right. So we're going to learn how to create a comprehensive asset inventory and categorization tool using a simple AI prompt. The instruction guide demonstrates how AI can help build an educational application for cybersecurity asset management and CMMC core. So we go down next. Oh, wait a second. What happened there? Okay. Well, we can go here. Um, so what you want to do again is set the scope of what you want AI to do, right? So you're going to have AI go in and say research the asset inventory and categorization requirement for the CMMC certification program, right? And analyze all the specific details that are needed in this report or in this tool, right? And it will come back and give you a unbelievable list of details of what goes into that tool. Now I cut it down a little bit here and this showed you. It says the inventory tool must have all five of these categories. So you put it's got to have all five of these, right? Key requirements. It has to have a complete inventory of all hardware, software assets. It has to have asset categorization per CMMC scoping guidelines. So it has to know the CMMC scope, right? It has to have a network topology and systems interconnections description. It has to have the data flow documentation for both CUI and FCI. It has to have asset ownership and management responsibilities, regular inventory updates and maintenance, and integration with the configuration management process. So when we get into that tool, it has to interconnect with them. So if you make a change in one, it changes the other, right? And that can either be done manually or you can create a process that does that, right? Um, and then it talks about that this asset tool is way better if you're using automated discovery tools, right? So if you're using SEIM or if you have like Cisco Discovery Protocol or things like that, and you can use those tools to do real-time asset discoveries and then download those lists and so on. If I was building a real corporate profile, that's what I would do, right? And then maintain asset database with regular updates, ensure classification aligns with the CMMC Level 2 scoping guideline requirements. Okay, and here they are. And then here is the prompt that I used. So I gave you an actual prompt that I used in building mine. So in this case, act as a cybersecurity professor, build a instructional website app using HTML5, embedded JavaScript, and Cascade style sheets. The application will be used to teach students how to build a asset inventory database. The web application will be named Asset Inventory and Categorization Report. The purpose of the application is to enable students to build an asset inventory database that provides foundational understanding of what is needed to protect and how. It defines the CMMC asset scope and ensures all relevant assets are properly secured. The inventory will be based on information students can pull from the organization case study provided to students, right? And then the inventory must cover all five asset categories. So it created all five of those, right? And then the fields in each one you can define. Well, DoD defines what has to be in there. Now, your organization might want more information in there, right? That's the whole thing about like an applicability study. What's applicable to our organization, right? So, as an example, if you only have one location, you might not need that, right? And then there might be other examples where you might want to know, are those assets on premise, off premise? Are they controlled by contractors? Are they controlled by employees of the organization? You get the idea. There could be other fields that you might want to have them consider when building each one of these each one of these tables or databases. Okay. So you can see all of these are defined. And then the only thing I would probably add at the end is that make sure that all of these are editable, that you can add new items in each table, you can remove items in each table, and that you can edit existing items in the table, right? So that might be the only thing I might add to this prompt, right? But I just gave you the prompt here, so you have an idea how to, how to use the prompt, okay? And then here is an example of what it built, okay? And this is fully functional um, asset inventory and categorization. Now I built ours out much, a much greater with much greater detail. But you can see I sort of like this one because it lets you navigate like this between the five tools, which is sort of nice. I mean, this one's actually, a little bit different than the other one I created, the first one I showed you, right? So you can lay them out differently. You can navigate between them differently. But you're also going to want things like add a button that lets me download all the data, right? Because you might need a printed copy of the data, right? Or print a formal report. And there are abilities in HTML where it will format it beautifully, right? And give you this beautiful formatted report, right? So those are buttons you might also add to a tool like this. Okay. But that would be generating a tool to act as your CUI asset inventory, right? And again, it has all five parts that are required by the CMMC requirements. Okay. Any questions on this one?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. Um, yeah, and this one I can tell I used AI Studio for. I can tell just by the layout of it, it looks different than the other one. So I used AI Studio to build this one. Okay. So that's the basics of how to build some of these tools. And you can see you can build any of these nine tools now, knowing some of that, right? As far as deploying this, um, the code for this, if I open this, um, so I'm going to go ahead and edit this page, show you the code. So you can see this is an iframe. Should turn it to an iframe here. And the iframe in this case is it's on the CMMC repository and it's called Acme Asset Inventory. So if I go and I want to see the code itself, um, do I not have that open here? Let me put it over here. Okay, and I'm in the right repository. I go to code and here's the file itself. So if I click on that, it will let me go in and actually see the code. So this is the code that it generated. Okay. So just an example of what it will actually build. All right. But I think this is a really great way to teach students how to actually do an inventory, um, and how AI now can be used to make tools that are better, more precise. And by the way, one of the other things you can do is like I could go to like Comet. Any is using Comet? Know what it is? Yes, no, okay.
Mm.
So
I've
Comet
not
is
heard of
a
it.
what's it?
I've not heard of it.
Okay, so Comet's an agentic
Yeah,
browser.
right. Yeah,
So it's a
it
smart
is.
browser, right? And what you can do, let me just show you real quick. Um, all right, I'm going to shrink this down for a second, and I'll bring this up. All right, so this is Comet, right? So it's just a browser, basically. Let me get rid of some of the stuff from yesterday. Okay. But what I can do with this is I can go into websites that are private websites. So I can log in with my credentials and so on and have it perform some kind of task, right? So in this case, what I might do is actually go to GitHub, or I could go to to this website, So I'll go to our course website. I'll go to the module and I'll go down to the section where we're doing the inventory categorization, right? And I'll go to the next page. And now I'll say, um, I go to assist and I can ask it a question now. So I can go in and say, research the CMMC requirements for the um, asset inventory and categorization report. And you got to spell it right here. Okay. And then I'll say, then analyze the tool um, let's say found in this page, analyze the um, the details and determine if it meets all the CMMC requirements. So now I can actually validate that it meets the requirements, right? And then I'll also say provide suggestions for improvement. Okay. And it will actually go into this page. It will analyze that tool step by step. So look at it, it's going into each part of this tool and analyzing it. And it's determining, does it have the pieces that are supposed to be there for CMMC level two scoping, right? So it's looking at the scoping required. I didn't tell it to do that, but it's going in and now doing a level two scoping guidance requirement analysis. Okay. And now it's giving me things that I could do to improve upon it. Right. So, and by the way, that's how I'll improve on this sometimes. And by the way, I'm teaching my students how to do some of these things now too, where you can take a standard, you can take a tool, and you can do an analysis to find out, does this meet what the standard is asking for, right? It does it meet the requirements that it's asking for? And if not, where is it short, right? I'm going to tell you, auditors are using this now too. Whether they say they or not, I guarantee you, if they know what they're doing with these, they're going to do that because it's going to do such a deep dive in determining are you perfectly aligning to all of the requirements, within the standard itself, right? But here it will give me, information back. Now, I don't necessarily need to implement all of these because it's always going to find something, right? But you'd want to go through and look at each one of these and say, is this valid? Should I add this to the tool, right? So in this case, they say recommendations to meet the CMMC more fully, right? Because it says it's met it, right? So implement an interactive table for all five categories using the field sets already defined in the page in the page text with row add, edit, delete, and inclusion in the download print format. So they're saying you should be able to download and print each one of the tools, not just the main one, right? Add per asset fields to support scoping documents, such as the network segmentation. And so that's actually a good idea. I might do that. Introduce simple data flow captures like CUI flows to and from fields. Oh, that would be interesting. All right. Include a categorization rationale or justification field for contractor risk management, specialization, and audit. Again, some of these are actually really good suggestions, right? Add an optional field that aligns with configuration management. So configuration item, so combined ID, baseline version. Change ticket references too. Okay. And that would tie to the maintenance report then too. So actually, I mean, these were actually pretty good. I don't think I ran this the last time I did this. Um, so it's a good idea to use tools like this to see what you're building is what you built actually what is required and does it align perfectly to the standards and the requirements. Okay. Um, but I'll tell you, we're using Comet more and more because it does such great stuff like this, right? And it's an application that runs on your system that you can put inside your private networks to actually do some analysis and stuff with your own tools, right? So you're not letting, something outside access these. So, okay. Um, any questions on this?
You know,
No questions? Okay. All right. I think we're going to take a break here. And Yuri's going to pick it up at noon. And he's going to do the second half of this. You see that, Yuri? Were you paying attention when I did this one?
I did. Did
Okay.
pay
It's pretty
attention.
cool,
I
huh?
learned something new.
Yeah. All right. Well, Yuri's going to take the second half. We'll pick up at the top of the hour. So if you want to take a break, grab something to eat or whatever, we'll take about 20 minutes and pick up at the top of the hour then. All right. All right. I'll put a little timer up. Or you want to put a timer up, Yuri? You want me to?
I can
Okay. And I'll stop sharing then.
share here and timer. And we'll do
Yeah, you want to do 20 minutes.
money.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
All right.
20 minutes it is. I will see you guys then. Thanks, John.
I'll go ahead and upload the GitHub directions from the other course in here if people want directions on how to build a GitHub account.
Okay, sounds good.
I'll do that right now.
All right, guys. So I hope that everybody had a good lunch. Hopefully most of you is back here. So John kind of went over the the basics of the CMMC, right, and how the CMMC works, and now of course the hard work comes in helping both the employers and the students to actually both practice and then of course go through the CMMC and earn the certification so they can bid or they can keep the government contracts that they already have with the DoD, right? So he showed you some of the tools and how to use them. I kind of pick up one of the 9 documents, of course, is the security assessment report, right? To me, that's kind of the centerpiece of the whole CMMC, that everything evolves around it, if you will, right? Pretty beefy document over here. So I thought that we can do a little example about how we will actually, build one of those, right? So to build the case study and then the report that the students can actually use the case study to complete the report, and practice about how they will actually find and validate the the information to actually fill the report that will then serve as a base for the CMMC certifications, right? So let me share the screen here. Mhm. So we have a couple of different case studies. John show you, how to build one of them, but there are 4 examples over here. I thought that we can start from the scratch. I really like Perplexity to start. Anybody use Perplexity before? Anybody knows of Perplexity? What it is, how it works? Nobody? Actually, the team behind Perplexity, that's the team that developed the Comet, right? So you can see that the web browser I'm using over here is the Comet. It has the assistant over here. But the Perplexity is actually the team that brought the Comet to life. And John was talking about Comet and how good it is and how helpful it is. But Perplexity, uh, technically speaking, it's not a LLM, right? So it uses other LLMs on the back end to really make the or validate the information before it will actually produce any output. The advantage from the academic standpoint is that it was developed by researchers for researchers. So it cuts down tremendously on hallucinations that other LLMs are suffering from. And it by default actually shows all the citations, so all the sources that it will actually use to do the research and create any output. It will actually list them by default, right? They all do that. Gemini will do it, Copilot will do it, ChatGPT will do it, but for most of them, you have to actually ask for those. You have to specifically tell the LLM that, hey, I want you to validate everything and provide me with the citations. The Perplexity will do that automatically. So that's why I like it. So John kind of, went around and he started building the case study first, and then he went kind of backwards and built the fillable form, if you will, or the document that the students will actually then need to be able to complete for the CMMC. I kind of like to go the other way around, right? So I like to first do the research about the CMMC, and the documents and the tools that the auditors needs to use and that the auditor needs to complete in order to actually, engage and pass the CMMC. And then based off of that, then I can move in and I can actually generate case study that is specific for each of the documents, right? Either way will work. You can create a one huge company, right, with all the information and all the snippets of data that the students will need to kind of identify and put into forms. Or you can just do let's say that you are teaching the risk assessment, right? So if you just want to do the security assessment, just one piece of the CMMC, you don't really need, all the other information that the students will need for the big company, right? It will take less time. It's cleaner to me, right? The disadvantage, of course, is if you want it to be a threaded case study through the whole semester and you want the students to develop multiple different documents and tools for the CMMC as a part of that course, then this approach will not work, right? So then you will have to expand it. But, I will almost copy what John did over here, right? So I would just say that, hey, research, right? The DoD CMMC certification version 2.0, right? We really want to make sure so it doesn't default to the first one, to the 5-level one. Yeah, specifically analyze the documents and tools our auditors need to complete for the certification process. Right? Something simple like that. I like to do what they call a zero shot. So John kind of goes in and he provides all the information to the LLM, right? Very specific things that he wants. I like to start with a very broad request or question, if you will, right? And then depending on what the LLM will give me, then I can actually refine and play with it and find more detail and more information as I go along. Right? So this is pretty good, right? I don't really want anything else from the LLM than go research the official CMMC certification, right? And kind of zoom in once it has some idea about what the CMMC is, then zoom in on the documents and the tools that the auditors will need to complete through the process, and then once it has that idea, we can move through, right? So if we will say that we really want to work on that security assessment report, I will say specifically analyze the sections of the security assessment report, right? And now I'm, once again zooming a little bit more in and says, hey, specifically analyze the section of the security assessment report, and provide me with description of each, right? And once again, let's see what it will give us over here. So now, it will tell you, and you can see that once again, it will tells you what it queries, right? Where the search goes here. That's what I like about it. Now, about perplexity, right? It will tells me what it actually is, right? Here. And the breakdown now, it's actually zooming on that SAR in the security assessment report over here, right? So there is executive summary, there is scope and environment, methodology and approach for it, applicable requirements and control sets, of course, and assessments of results overview, right? Detail results by requirement, and then, of course, the findings and deficiencies, right? Risk analysis and what the residual risk will be after implementing the controls here. recommendations and remediations guidance, for the technicians, right? And then of course the POAM linkage, so that's another document out of the 9 documents that John was talking about, right? So what will be the plan of actions and what will be the milestones, essentially just a timeline when the actions needs to be actually completed over here. And then of course, conclusions and attestations, right? And that's essentially yay or nay about if the organization actually, should pass the certification, conditionally pass the certifications, or not pass the certification, right? That's when the auditor actually makes the decision over here. Now, I already know that this is, good. Of course, you will go in, right, and you will, your subject matter expertise comes into play over here, and you need to validate that this is actually correct, right? But this looks pretty good to me, right? For once, I can go here and I can see the links, right? So this is where it actually, where the Perplexity actually went to collect the information that it provide me with over here, right? It used some images, so whatever images it actually took into the learning process are all there in the answers. You can see that I can actually see the sources for each and every section over here, right? So these are just clickable links, so I can go here and I can actually open it up and it will tell me that, hey, it took it from the cyber health, right? And I can actually find the information right here. That's one of the greatest advantages to me, to Perplexity, right? Because you can verify it right there. You can validate the sources. Now, so now I have some idea about what the final product, if you will, right, for the students will look like, right? The students will create a report that will have all these sections here, starting with the executive summary, going through the scope, all the way to the conclusion and attestation when they will need to make the decision, hey, are the findings actually severe enough not to earn the certification, right? Should it be earned provisionally, right? So there will be a 90 days for the company to actually remediate some of the findings, or is this a clean bill of health, so to speak, right? Very few of those will be actually, without any findings, right? Every audit will usually find something, some improvements that that the company can go through, right? So now I have that. Now I can actually move and say, hey, now when you have all the information, start building for me some company, right? And give me the information about the company that the students will actually need to fill up, if you will, right, or complete. There's a huge report that they need that they need to complete for the class or for the assignments or whatever it may be over here. Right. You can see that it already asked me over here if I want to do a slide deck for that. Now, most of this, of course, it's at level 2, right? That's level 1 is a self-assessment, so that there is a very little that the our students will actually need to do over there. Level 3, that's just for the primes, and that's a government contracts, big companies. Once again, most of the students from our programs they are probably a couple of years out before they will be able to work on these huge contracts for different companies. So they will live on that level 2 over here. The mid tier, if you will, that will actually that they will need to satisfy that level 2 requirement for the SARS here. Right. So now I can take this and I will probably take it to the other tool, right? I don't really like to use Perplexity for coding. Perplexity is great for research. I really like it for research, but for coding itself, I will probably just grab all of this and I will take it. And I know that John used Gemini for the first part of the class, but we are impressed with the Gemini. We really like Gemini. That's my go-to tool right now. it evolved. I started with ChatGPT like anybody else. Then we moved to the Claude. Claude was great for coding. It could create a really impressive stuff. And then eventually, the Google is kind of overtaking, I would say, everybody in their quest to actually dominate the AI right now. And they do a great job, and they really put some money and some listen to the customers and implement some features and functionalities that the customers like over here, right? So yeah, I can just copy all of this, right? If I can do that. I will go to the Gemini over here, right? And I will essentially says now, once again, I will assign, just like John did, right, some role, what I want the AI to do over here, right? What it should behave like, what the purpose of this is. So I will say act as expert instructional designer, creating, let's say, training material, creating training materials for community college students, right? So this is, hey, this is who you are now, right? This is what you're supposed to do, so take this educational, academic, if you will, approach to whatever I'm asking you to do over here, right? And I can say create highly realistic. You can even say hyper realistic, right? And then it really goes to town. It will give you all kind of suggestions about how you can improve it, and we can go through the improvement process, right? But highly realistic case study, students can use the practice CMMC auditing process if I can type auditing process specifically the security assessment report as outlined in the right in the attachment. And I will just attach this to it. Oops, what happened? Why is it not allowing me to do the attachment here? Okay, so let's change the attachment outlined below, and we will just attach it here. Right, so that's just the information that I got from Perplexity that I want to use for that. Right, I want to provide some more information over here. Right, I want to tell it how it should look and what it should be. Right, so I have a the assessment report as outlined below. Right, I will say provide students with enough information to complete the SAR, right? So, hey, study the parts of it, right? And then provide the students with enough information so they can actually complete every single part of the report here. That's what I want from it, right? to complete the SAR. Don't give students the answers, but let them hunt for information about the enterprise, assets, data, employees, policies, and procedures. Right. So I don't want sometimes when you don't say this, it will just say that, hey, there is a problem with X, right? So the students can just, say, hey, there is a problem with X. I don't want it. I want the LLM to give me like a policy and procedure and then some findings, and the students will have to essentially, go through the policy, read the policy, right, understand the policy, and then decide if the findings actually adhere to the policy or not. So I'm saying don't give them the findings already. Let them find it themselves, right? Make the what can I say? And that may be it for now, right? Do you understand? And I will say over here, before I do that, I will say use HTML5 with embedded JavaScript and CSS, right? Because I want it interactive, I want it to look pretty. Do you understand? Now, if you actually want to see the product, John showed you the web page that you can actually go and you can put the HTML code over there and run it. The Gemini will actually allow you to see the preview of the code of the application, if you will. Right. For that, you have to click on Tools over here, and you can select the canvas. Right. The canvas is essentially where it will show you what the product is and what it's actually creating over there. You can switch between the preview and between the code, and I will show you how to do that over here. Right. But now that's it for now, right? So fairly simple, what is the function, right? What is the role of it over here? What I'm asking for is a highly realistic case study over here for the students, right? The students, of course, your audience is a community college students over here. They practice the CMMC auditing, right? I want specifically the assessment report. The outline is below. That's what I, grabbed from the Perplexity before, right? And I want to be very specific over here. So hey, provide enough information, so the students can actually complete the report, right? But don't give them the answers. Let them hunt for the information, and let them to fill it, as they go through the case study, right? So let's see what it will actually give us over here. That formulates the scenario, and you can open this and you can actually see, how it goes through the thinking process and how it's developing the interactive that I actually want. You see, it gives it a name, Aerotech Dynamic. It looks like it, right? The concept is to help have students step into the role of the auditor, sifting through the data compiled. This will be a single HTML file with interfaces, so it understood what I actually want over here, right? Builds the audit evidence, right? So it actually crafts the audit materials for the company here that they will need to unearth, right? So incomplete logs, interview responses, outdated policies, that all will be part of it. I really like that, right? So they can actually see that that there are no real ends where it's all a detective work when they have to compare the reality, right, with the promise, so to speak. You have some policy which is the promise, and then of course the reality that comes from either artifacts or the interview process here, right? Defines the interface, and here we go, right? So the case study objections over here, right? You are provisional CMMC assessor over here. You've been hired to perform a mock CMMC level assessment. I may remove this, right, if I want to make it really realistic. Then I don't want to tell them that, hey, this is a mock CMMC level, right? This is information about the company here, the objectives, right? They are already for the certification, right? So it will be internal audit, right? Of course, it knows that it's all based off the NIST 800-171 requirements, right? The deliverable can be the SERS, right? You're supposed to review the evidence as a student, right? Hunt for the inconsistencies between what they say, the policy, and what they do. So the logs or the reviews, the artifacts, if you will, or the interviews with the users, right? Determine if the controls met or not met, right? So that's once again crucial part of the assessment process. Of course, is to determine, right? Is the not if the control is or isn't implemented, but does it actually do what we said that it will do here, right? And then of course write the recommendations uh, uh, for the CEO and remediation for some issues, right? So for some findings that they will actually see. That's just instruction, right? You can see that it names it as an auditor workbench over here, right? It gives it a marginal name over here. I kind of like it. It's a lot of acronyms, but it makes it realistic here. Yeah. So the evidence repository over here, right? System security plan. This is just an excerpt, the information that the students will need, right? They need to know the information about the company, right? So it's right here, the environment and the scope. Remember that one of the parts was the scope, of course. So they need to understand the scope and the assets that are actually in that scope, right? Versus assets that are out of the scope. So it knew that, hey, not everything is actually covered, right? If is it not CUE, of course, then it's not covered by CMMC, and therefore, it's not part of the assessment process, right? The audit process over here. Some connections, right? Dedicated fiber line, remote access via VPN for engineering staff only, right? Kind of brief, I may expand it, right? I may go to the John's Road and I can say, hey, guess what? I want multiple locations over here, more people, right, that work over there, bigger company, because I want the students to really think about, real world settings when, most likely it's not just a one office sitting somewhere, right? So we can play with it, uh, interview transcripts from the IT administration, right? So you can see that this is what the auditor will actually ask for, right? Right. Let's talk about the ACL 2-3.1.1, right? How do you manage the administrative accounts? I mean, that's a real question from the audit, right? The CMMC auditor can actually come to the IT department and can ask the administrator about, hey, how do you actually make sure that the administrator account is protected, right? How do you manage it? And that will be incredibly important going forward with all the deep fakes and how good the AI actually become with the deep fakes and attacking people, right? So we were just at the event yesterday, and the administrator, the head of the IT, was telling us that now the IT departments, they have a code words, right? So if someone calls like, hey, can you reset my administrative password? They have a code word that the person has to say before they will actually do it, right? Because anybody can now mimic, right, the voice of anybody else. All you need is like 60 seconds of someone voice, right? So all you need is someone to say few words, and then the AI is actually so good that now it can create the voice of almost anybody. And so many attacks now, so many ransomware and social engineering attacks are using the deep fakes, right? So how would you go about it? And then of course the Marcus, right? So that's the person, of course, from the IT. Here is the response, right? Well, we have a domain admin account. Since it's just me and junior tech Sarah, we usually just share the password for the account to keep things moving fast. It's stored in a keep pass vault we both can open. Yeah, that probably not the best, right? Right? I mean, that's but I mean, that's what it may say, right? I mean, that this is one of the answers that they may provide the auditor with, right? Now, what about the multi-factor authentication and so forth, so on? You can see that it actually create realistic interview, right? Question and answer. What the question may be from the auditor for sure, right? What some of the answers may be from the interviewing, right? So they, the three-step auditing process, is hey, we will review the documentation, right? Then we will study the artifacts, right? So the products, and then of course interview the users, right? The first two steps, they are kind of easy, I mean, everybody has a policy. It's not that hard to write a policy, right? Systems now produce tons of evidence, so artifacts are not that hard to come by, right? To actually collect, to analyze. Really, the sticky point over here is, hey, do the users know, what they're supposed to do, what the policies actually says about how they should protect the data over here, right? So the students will need to understand, right, as they are going through this, they will have to understand, hey, is this correct or is it not, right? And for that, of course, they can click over here, right? They have a policies over here, so they are, look at this, right? Account sharing is strictly prohibited, right? So guess what? From this, you already know that Marcus is failing over here, right? And the students, they need to be able to, recognize it, right? And actually log it as such, right? I like this. A lot of the times you see a case scenario and they will just tell you like, hey, the IT administrator shares account, right? And it will just state it over there. It will just provide the students with the information. This is much more realistic, right? It requires for the students to read through it, comprehend this, right, and then go actually to the policies and the documentation and find out what the company says that it will do, right? And then say, hey, are we actually doing what we said that we will do, right? Transcript from the HR director, the same, right? So some questions and some answers over here, and you will go through it, right? It says when the interview was actually done, right? By whom, so Linda K is from the HR, I mean, these all the information that you will actually see that the students will see, the AI can generate it because it understands what the information needs to be for the students to actually have uh, the pertinent information to generate uh, the report, right, as requested over here. And then, of course, some system configuration and logs, right? Once again, so you have two interviews over here, one with the IT, one with the HR, which then may be enough, the interviews may be enough. I will probably say that we need a little more on the configuration and log informations here, right? So there is a alert over here, right? So the account will never log out. The policy, I would assume, says over here that, after so many attempts, well, it says it right here, right? 3 attempts within 15 minutes, right? The account will actually log. So once again, that's a fail over here, But, you can see that the students actually, need to figure out if this is actually in a policy, right? If this is not in a policy, then guess what? It's not finding, right? Because the company never really says that, hey, we will do that, right? It may be a recommendation to implement it, but it's not a finding on the audit itself over here, right? And the firewall rules for the exporting, right? There is some legacy access through the 3389, so Windows server access over here for the remote access, right? So they will have to go through it, right? And then it actually create the report over here, so it's all in one. I don't know if I will use this. It has the executive summary, so they will have to write the executive summary. We will have to provide the students with more information for sure here, so they can actually fill all of this, right? It automatically pre-select that this is for the level 2. Once again, I kind of like, I would like to have all the 3 levels and let the students to decide if they will have more information about the company, right? To let them decide what level this actually the company actually needs here. The scope and the environment. I'm not really sure that they have enough information here about what the scope will be. I guess they will just put these 4 things here, right? And then detailed findings. So this will be actually what they found over here, right? So what the evidence was that they review actually, right? The status of that, right? So some of them we are meeting it, right? Some of them they will be not met, and some of them they will be not applicable over here, right? And the observation, hey, what is the gap over here? They shared the account according to Marcus over here, right? They shared the account when the policy clearly states that there should be a no sharing of accounts between the employees over here, right? And so they can go through it and they can actually fill it, right, as they will in a regular auditing process as they are going through it, right? Then, of course, the hard part over here is the risk analysis and recommendations. They will actually have to uh, uh, compute, right, what the risk is over here. So they will have to take all the not met findings on that report, right, and decide what threat does it cause the classify the confidential or unclassified informations over here, right? So they will have to fill it up over here, and they will have to produce some recommendations for remediations actions, right? So what can we do to actually prevent this from happening, right? What will be the control? What will be the procedure to actually protect the data better over here? And then, of course, at the end, right, they will have to, they will have to attest it, right? So, hey, it's a recommended for certification, not recommended. There is actually a third option. There is a recommended conditional recommendation for attestation, right? So there are actually, if you have findings, you have 90 days to remediate the findings, so you have it conditionally approved for 90 days pending the further review after the remediation has been implemented, right? So a few different things that I will probably change over here. And then, of course, you have to print or to save the PDF, right? So if the students need to upload this, for grading, if this is actually assignment for the class, then, I like that it automatically, I didn't even ask for this, but it automatically add the print and save PDF button, so it will actually give me or give the student the option to actually do that, right? And now, so this is a zero shot, right? Would I use it? Probably not. Once again, John kind of like to go in and provide all the information at the beginning, right? And go on a long kind of a writing journey to really think about everything and anything that he wants over here. The zero shot essentially starts with some product, and then it's a series of refinements over here. So I will say that for this to be more realistic, right? I will say that, hey, you need to provide the students with more detailed information about the enterprise. Provide students with more details about the enterprise, including employee count, locations, and clearance status. So that may be one, right? I really want to see that. I want the students to understand that. I would say that the students will probably need for to understand who is who in a company. So include employee directory with work titles and mark contact information here. Now, this may be okay. These transcripts, policy documents, maybe provide network topology, including cloud infrastructure. Right, so a little more information about that that I will give to the students. Provide more details about data assets. Right. So I will, I will refine it a little bit over here, right? So, I want a little more information about the enterprise so the students can, have a better grasp about how big the company is, how many employees it has, what are the locations, right? What are the key players, key stakeholders over here? What the clearance status is, if any, here, right? I want the employee directory, so we know who Marcus actually is, and who Linda from HR actually is. Are they just regular admins, or are they like a CISO or a CFO, or a HR manager or director? So that will give the students a little more meat as they are moving through the case study over here, I think. Right. And then, of course, this is all about the CUI. So I want a little more about the data that they are actually trying to protect over here. How they decide what needs or doesn't need to be protected over here, and what is or isn't part of the audit here. And hopefully it will give me some information about the network topology, right? So a lot of our students, especially at the community college level, they are more technicians. So I think that the more information you can give them about technology is both good and bad, because they understand it more, but sometimes they kind of get lost in the technician stuff, I would say, right? Technology, and they spend so much time on the technology, and they kind of forget about people and procedures and policies and all of that. So I kind of want to both give them more information and also muddy the water for them a little bit, so they really have to think about what is actually important and what they need to be thinking about. Okay, so now you see, right? So much better organizational overview, right? The headquarters, Dayton, Ohio. Wow. Okay, right? Satellite locations, non-remote workforce presence in Huntsville, Alabama. I kind of like it, right? So there are some people that are not in that office 45 employees, right? Secret clearance, 5 executive, undeclared for the all US citizens, right? So that's important, of course, you actually have to provide that information. This is the key personnel over here. So this is the CEO, the chief engineer, IT lead, system admins, HR director. So Linda, I guess, is a director here, right? Two of them, the chief engineer and the CEO, they have a secret clearance. The rest of them, they have nothing, right? And what is the responsibilities from the CMMC standpoint, right? So authorizing official, data owner, the chief engineer. So Bob is actually the data owner for the CMMC over here. You have the system admin over here, help desk, personal security, right? Then the environment and network topology. So now they have some information about what the boundaries actually are, right? Now it's a hybrid system. Before they didn't know, right? Before it was all kind of, all or nothing, right? They could imagine a lot of it. Now they actually know that, hey, this is, both on-prem and cloud environment, right? We are running hybrid, which is once again more realistic. Majority of the companies will have probably hybrid environment nowadays, right? And then the asset inventory, right? So, it just improves just on the company profile. You can see that it clearly improve that, right? The rest of it stays pretty much the same. Now, I like to move one by one, right? So, I will leave these two, maybe actually all of those. Now, if this is just a 1 hour case study that I just want the students to do after we talk about the security assessment report, that this may be enough information, because there will probably, take them 45 minutes to hour to actually complete this. I don't really care for this security assessment report, so I may come here and I may, change the target CMMC level, right? I can instruct the AI to recreate this, so the students will actually be responsible for selecting, right, what this is over here, what level they think that this will be under here, right? The scope and environment, I like this. I'll probably say that for the section 3, right, I don't want the detailed findings to be pre-selected for them. You can see that they already tell them, right, which ones they should find over here, right? I don't want to do that. I probably just want a plus button over here, so they actually really have to go and they have to decide what needs to be here, how many, right, and what they will be, select them. So I can change the section 3 to actually create some interactive that they will need to select all of the information from the drop down or whatever it may be. I kind of don't like the risk analysis over here. I would say that the students, most of my students, they will probably need more information about how to compute, right, the risk analysis. So provide them with some formula, or some more information about how the company will actually compute the risk analysis for each of the findings that exist over here. And once again, for the conclusion and attestations, I will want to add the third one. And, I will just come here and I will put them just like I did with the company profile, right? I will just list all of my quote unquote demands, right? And it will actually, implement it, right? And it will give me the output that I actually want over here. The beauty of this is that once I have this, right, I can just say, hey, change the company's information, right? And that may be, enough to actually completely change the whole report. And I can say, change the company information, change the findings, right? And I can do that 5 times in a row. And now I have 5 case studies that I can give to the 5 teams, and they all work on the same basic exercise, right? But every single team will have different findings, will have different recommendations, and will make a different final final conclusion to it, right? So now you don't have to say that, hey, this is a static, this is something that one team does it, and then you hear a same five presentation from five different teams. They all talk about the same exact company, same exact people, same exact findings. Right now, you actually have a five completely different presentations that are all about the security assessment report, but they are different enough so they can be engaged through the presentation, because they need to listen what each and every team actually found and what the finding meant to them and what they will recommend here, right? So that's to me, that's one of the greatest strengths of the AI, is the ease of developing many versions of these, right? And I really like what John did in his, I do that almost with all my builds and all my materials that I do now. I will just say analyze the case study, right? Act as master trainer and make it hyper realistic for students to practice the CMMC certification process. Give me recommendations for improvements and information students will need to successfully complete the document. Right. This is very much the most underappreciated part of AI. I think it's a great sounding board that it will give you ideas that you may never even think about it. So I essentially just say, hey, this looks pretty good, but I wanted to make it more realistic, right? So give me a recommendation for improvements and provide me with information students will need to successfully complete the document, right? And now we can see that it will just, and I can do what John did. I can actually open it in an assistant and I can ask the assistant. It's the same thing, right? It's the same LLM that is actually behind it. That will provide me with the recommendations on that. Right. So master trainer guide. Here's the analysis. Needs to hunt for successful complete the SAR. Master trainer recommendations. The elevated this from a simple quiz to a realistic CMMC simulation considers these instructional adjustments, right? The paper shield fallacy. So it's two adders essentially, right? Now the policy actually says the one thing, right? The configuration, the AD output contradicts it, so the students can see right away. I mean, you can see that we found right away that, hey, this is we are saying that we will not share the accounts, and yet Marcus says that we will do that, right? Kind of two adders over here, right? So students often trust the policy documents too much. You must teach them that configuration then is based off of the policy over here, right? So recommendation is to force students to quote both documents into SARS. If they only cite the policy, they failed the question. The finding is the discrepancy over here, right? Scope creep and data flow, the SSP, the security plan clearly lists the manufacturing floor. IoT is out of scope, right? In reality, scope is the hardest part. If a drawing goes to the floor to be printed, the floor is in scope, right? And that is true, right? one of the hardest thing is actually to decide what assets are or are not in the scope. If you've ever been part of any audit, that's usually where the auditing team spends most of their time to negotiate kind of or debating, what is actually in scope over here, right? What should be or shouldn't be covered by that. So it's a great point over here about the scope, how the students make that decisions as auditors, right? What is actually belonging to the scope and what should be part of that audit. And we probably, should train them on that, right? And then the cloud over here, right? 365, of course, it's high. The students need to understand they don't audit Microsoft 365, right? They audit the configuration of it, right? So just the connection to the 365. Now, some students, and that's a valid point because I had it from some of my students. They think that they can just go to the Microsoft and audit it, right? When they need to. So that's a great point over here, right? The answer key, once again, this is uh, clear cut over here, right? We once again, it's all about the sharing, right? Account is the sharing is prohibited over here. So if is it they really have to think about if is it met or not met, right? So how we can improve any of this, for any of these answers, you know. Uh, Visualizations, right? I really like this when it actually provides them with some visualizations tool instead of just saying that, hey, this is what we have, right? This kind of gives them a better way of understanding it. Uh, uh, I like this, when it will give them some screenshots as a part of the audit, the artifacts that you will actually collect over here, right? That will probably be a great way to, the org chart versus the AD user list, Active Directory. So this is all about the control, right? The access control over here. Just because they are in the AD doesn't mean that they are actually part of the organizations anymore. And we see it all the time when companies they have a doormat, or accounts that are actually not being used because the users are no longer with the company. And then the remediations, right? It actually asked do both the technical and the process remediations for that, right? And John was talking about it, right? Do I need to implement all of it? Probably not, but some of them they are really good points that will make it more realistic for the students, and once again, kind of muddy the water a little bit for them, right? So they understand that this is not a black and white, right? This is not a clear cut. There is a lot of back and forth, right? A lot of work when they actually need to put the thinking head on and figure out if, hey, I have a policy, right? I have something that the users are saying in interviews, and then I have a reality, right? And I need to kind of come in terms put an equal sign between all three of them for the item to actually pass the audit, right? It's not just two, it's certainly not one. They all have to align over here, and if they are not aligning, then there is, I cannot just expect to work in a company and see like, hey, these are the gaps, right? These are the greens, these are the yellows, and these are the reds, right? That's not how it works. It's my job to actually put the green, yellow, and reds to each of the controls and the audit assets that I'm auditing, right? And that's, so that will probably help them tremendously, right? So you can see that this. I mean, you can spend probably next half an hour, 45 minutes, just try to figure out how we will implement at least some of these, right? If not all of them, to make it more realistic, right? Before we give it to the students. And once again, it all depends on the level that you want to do, right? The time limits that you have for this exercise. Some of it, it's probably too much, right? Some of it maybe goes too deep. The students, they don't really have the understanding yet. If this is a 100 level class, they may not be there yet to actually understand, how the processes works and all of that, right? But, depending uh, on the depth of the knowledge and on the time requirements that you actually have for them, this can be essentially improved, right, tremendously still. And then you do what John did over here, right? Once I'm happy with what I have over here, right, I can just click on code over here, and this is just HTML code, right? Everything is embedded, single code that I can just bring in. You can see that it starts with HTML over here, right? It ends with HTML down here. So I know that this is just a simple HTML5 code. All I need to do is to copy it, right? Copy the content, or I can select all of it. I can copy. I can bring it to, my GitHub, right? I will just add file over here, and I will say to create one. Put it here, and I will say class HTML, very important, right? You always have to put the .html, otherwise the web browser will actually not know how to process the code. I will commit the change. I like that now the Copilot actually will put the extended description over here, so it will, as you are making changes and you versioning the products, the HTML code, it will actually analyze what happened with the code, and it will put it over there, right? And I really like it. I think it brings clarity to it. And then, so here we go. This is the class. Now this is the hardest part of it, because this is all about patience, right? CMMC, what did we name it? Class HTML. Not there yet. No, it's still pending the update. Like I told you, patient is not really my strongest suit over here. And then, of course, to bring it to the canvas, right? We will do the iframe over here. Now, I like to use the iframe generator over here. There is a tons of them online, and we can put one actually in a class, but it's CMMC class HTML. You see, and here it is, right? I will extend it a little more. I'll say 1250 times 1000, maybe. It doesn't need to be that tall, but this looks pretty good, right? I would just, copy this, bring it to the course, and we just did a security assessment. So I'll just do a new page. I'll call it test over here. Two ways how to do that, right? I can insert the embedded code here, or I can just click over here on the HTML, put it in, save it. And this is what the students will see, right? Now it's fully interactive, of course. They can play with it, they can fill it up over here. And once they are done, they can print it, right? So they will, they can print it, save this as a PDF, submit it, and there will be actually a way to how they will submit the assignment to you, right? That's one way how to do it, right? It's actually start the other way around. You kind of you start with the report itself, right? And then you kind of build the case for the specific uh, specific report that you have, right? Uh, we have I have some more information about it. So if we actually go to the security assessment report in a class over here, yeah. Anybody's familiar with the Notebook LM? Did you guys ever work with Notebook LM? Do you know what Notebook LM is? Nobody? Gosh, you love Notebook LM. So all of these are generated in Notebook LM, right? So I have a little podcast over here that the students can listen to. So, right, it just goes through the material over here. There is a video about the security assessment report. So, both audio and visual way how to do that. And then I have an infographic over here, right, which kind of, explains the whole security assessment report, right? So at a glance, it's just like diagnostics of your cybersecurity health, of course, right? There is three core purposes of that, right? So the current state of the documentation, right? The identifying the security gaps, and then of course providing the remediation for the gaps, right? What are you going to do about the findings, if you will? Yeah. Starts with the system security plan, right? So that's the blueprint. That's what you essentially promise, if you will, that you will that you will do, right? How will you protect the infrastructure over here? Then you do the security assessment, right? That's the diagnostics. You are actually validating, what is happening in the reality over here. And then, of course, then the treatment plan, right? So what's the findings? How do you close those gaps? What are you going to do about the findings that you found over here? So it's a nice little uh, infographics that kind of summarize it in a nice way for the students to actually look and understand what the process is as they are going through the security assessment, right? What is the point of actually creating the report, and what function does it serve? Not just for the cybersecurity or CMMC certifications, but for the cybersecurity, for the compliance piece of the company altogether, right? And all of these were created in Notebook LM. So Notebook LM is a product from Microsoft, from Google, right? Another product from Google, Google Labs. They put Notebook LM maybe 2 years ago. They implement a new features about 2-3 months ago now. Uh, Essentially, what you do over here, you create a notebook, you upload your sources, and you control your sources. And that's why I like it so much, and that's why it's so helpful for the academia, right? I can upload the documents from the Google Drive. I can copy just the text that I already have, right? And then I can also link the website or YouTube videos over here. Now, so remember when we did the research over here, I have the research here, right? I can just copy it, and I can just paste this as a copied text, right? So this is all the information about the report itself. Now, nothing else, right? Doesn't really talk about anything else, but I can insert it, right? Now it will process the data over here, right? Now you can see that all my sources are just the text that I just inputted in over here, right? It summarizes it over here, so it tells me what it is, right? What the data is actually all about over here. Now it's fairly short, right? I can actually ask it to find more information about it, and it will find another sources that I can then decide if I want to actually implement the data from those sources or not, right? So then I can create the audio overview. So that's the podcast over here. I just click on it and it will create the podcast, right? I can create the video overview over here. I can create a mind map of the main ideas over here. I can do a report, right? So if the students need to do a report, the flashcards, and I can do a quiz over here, that will do a 8 to 15 questions quiz about the material when the students can actually practice here. Now, it takes a little bit, right? You can see that the mind map is already done, right? So this is what this is essentially the lesson, right? So it's the security assessment report. It talks about the environment, executive summary, right? And I can actually expand all of these, and you can see that it will give me the main ideas that it actually talks about, right? I can present it from here, I can download it as a PNGs, but that the students will have a nice little way to actually connect, all the ideas from the document that I just uploaded, right? The flashcards over here. So what formal documents does CMMC requires to capture, right? Security assessment report, right? You can click on explain, and it will actually go in, and the chatbot will actually explain why, right? What the explanation is, and the students can just go through them. You can see that there is a 31 cards, right? That the students can actually go through, and they can practice some of these terms and what they actually mean over here. The audio and the video takes a little longer, but it generates it. All you need to do over here, you can actually share it, with the students. So if I click share over here, I can share it with the people over here, right? I can restrict the access, to people with the link. I can even notify the people that there is some updates to it, new updates to it. And you can, of course, download all of that. Right. But that's a notebook LM free. If you have a educational account, so if you have a EDU address, I think that right now they give you and I don't know if they still do that, but there was they had a period when they actually give you a 12 months for free for the pro version, so the mid-tier version. For 12 months for free if you actually attach your EDU account to it. So I got it for free in like June or July of this year. Right. So that's how all of these were created, right? For the 3 different reports that are here. And then of course, PowerPoint for the students. So if you if your students still like PowerPoints, and a lot of them they do, you can use a Gamma to actually create this. So that's another tool that you can use to actually create any of those. Is a gamma.app. And once again, I can just paste the text over here, right? So this is the executive summary about it. I can create a presentation here. I can do a web page. I can do a document, or I can do a social media post. I can select the size of that, right? So traditional, tall, or fluid. I can say that, hey, I want to use this as a notes or outline, right? So just study it and then, recreate it, right? Augment it in any way. I want to summarize this, so I want to make a shorter version, concise, or I want to preserve this exact text, right? So it will just split it logically into the different slides, right? And you can just say, hey, give me the ideas over here. You can see it card by card, right? You can split it, by cards, or you can do a free form. You can say how much content you want on each slide, minimal, concise, detailed, or extensive. Over here, you can actually talk about the audience over here. So, as the AI is rewriting, right, the content, the more it knows about audience, it will kind of select the appropriate language and level for the audience, right? So this is not for the assessors, so I will actually says over here, it's a community college students in cybersecurity program, right? Tone, right? Clear, authoritative, precise, that's probably okay, right? You can actually select different languages here now, so it will translate it to any language. Visuals, right? So I can actually select the themes over here. I can select the model for creating the images for each of them. I will let the AI to decide over here. You could do different styles of the images, so photorealistic, illustration, abstract, 3D, line art, or custom. So if you have something, your preferred style, you can actually upload it over here. And then if you have a central theme, so you can actually upload it. You can actually type it over here, extra keywords, and then everything and anything that it creates, it kind of looks through the lens of that keyword that you select, right? So let's do a line art over here. We will let the system decide. There's a free version of the Gamma that will allows you to do 10 cards. The paid version, it will allow you to do 25, but 10 is probably enough over here. So just click generate over here, and then it will actually create, right? And you can see that this is actually creating now the PowerPoint presentation, right? And you can see that the AI is generating the image over here, right? That's what the spinning is over here. So it's analyzing the text, the content, and generates the appropriate image for that, right? Actually, pretty good. Now I can go in and I can, of course, play with all of this, right? I can delete something, I can add, you can see I can change the text, the colors. I can even edit it with AI, so I can just select something and say, hey, rewrite this, right? More engaging, expand it, condense, all of these options are available for you, right? The strategic overview over here, defining boundaries, this is very heavy on text, so I will probably go in and I will change it. But you can see how easy it is actually for the students if they need to present then their findings, right? So if this is actually assignment, then you will tell them, hey, your job is to actually create the security assessment report, right? Analyze this company and then create it. Then you can tell them, hey, you will have to present it as a team or individuals, to the rest of the class, right? And a lot of my students, they will always, fret or kind of, they don't like it because they are not that skilled with the PowerPoint, right? A lot of their PowerPoints, they don't look that great, and neither do mine, right? I'm not a graphic designer, I'm not an artist. So, I tell my students, hey, just use this tool, right? I don't really care if you can do PowerPoint. That's not the objective of this class, right? Just use your content, your information, and let Gamma to actually create some of PowerPoint that you now can, be proud of and you can present from, and they can actually, generate this, right? Once again, they can go in and they can play with the words and reword it and change the pictures. They can just click over here and delete it and change and do all kind of crazy things with the pictures. They don't even have to download it, right? They can actually download it over here in the export, but they can present from here. So if they click the present over here, they just it takes them right to the presentation mode and they can present straight from the Gamma, so they don't even have to download it. All they need to have is a internet connection over here, right? So if you were wondering how we created all of these beautiful presentations, it's all Gamma, right? It's all the we just upload the data and then let Gamma to actually make it pretty for us, right? Any questions about any of this? how would you go about to actually create? How will you use, the AI to help you? Do you guys see how, and how much easier it is to actually create a very engaging, realistic, right, case studies that the students now, instead of just reading some book and trying to imagine what it actually looks like in a real world, that they can now actually, you can actually put them in a situation when they are, working through some case scenario that actually, mimic the real audit or CMMC certification, uh, uh, with a great accuracy. And we just did two of them. John did one, in hour and a half, and I just did one in hour and a half, right? If you spend, 2-3 hours on them, right? You hopefully you can see how, what amazing things you can generate and you can create with these tools, right? If you use them effectively. Yes, no, maybe.
Definitely, yes.
Thank you, Lexima. It's nice to see that someone's still out there, that I'm not just sitting in front of the screen here. No. Right. So we give you some information over here, right? So when you go, the 4 case studies are here, and they are all a little different, right? The whole point with the AI is that whatever it generates, it's unique, right? So it actually generates the uh, uh, whatever you generate is actually yours, right? You have the copyright to it, So you can run the same prompt through the same LLM 100 times, and the output will be different, every single time, right? That's not a error. That's actually by design. So we have a 4. John uploaded the ages that you guys created over here, but if you look on some of them, right? Some of them, they have more technical information. Some of them, they are more towards the all in, what I will call all in one, when they actually have the report or the plan or the document or the tool that the students or the auditors, if you will, need to actually complete. It's actually part of it, right? So I create both, so you can kind of see the difference, right, depending on the level and the time requirements over here. So over here you have the Stratum Defense, right? Company overview. Once again, kind of see what the data centers are, what the operational focus is over here, right? You can see that this has more locations and the connectivity for the AWS over here. So the students need to think about it, right? They have the topology for the network, everything is connected through the VPN, of course. Then the segmentation, right? Because they will have to understand, how segmentation, John was talking about it, right? That's one of the requirements to actually figure out if the network is properly segmented over here. So they can look through it. I like this one because it actually has the audit notes over here. So the students can actually, as they are going through it, right, they can type the notes over here, kind of the ideas that they see as they go through, right? And then they can just look through it instead of just, trying to go back and hunt where they actually saw some piece of information. So I kind of like the notes, and all I did was to ask the AI to actually provide the students with the note taking capabilities over here. Right? It talks about the infrastructure and the cloud over here, so they have some understanding about what is actually running where, right, and how is it connected. So if you are teaching AWS, the students should understand, what all of this means, right? This is a real AWS naming conventions, for the East and West Coast AWS data centers, the security controls that exist. you can see that this is, this is the old way of doing it, right? This actually tells the student exactly what is wrong and what is right, right? It tells them, hey, this is a critical gap over here, right? 17% of the user likes MFA, right? For the legacy systems, I sometimes it's appropriate, right? Once again, if you just want to kind of introduce it to the students, I would say that that's not realistic though anymore, right? If we are just telling them what the gaps are, then how would they know, that in a real world, there is no such thing as a list of gaps, right? I mean, that's their job to figure out what the gaps actually are. Yeah. The data flows over here, right? So engineering and contracts, how the data actually go through the system over here. Manufacturing, once again, employee directory over here, so you have all the stakeholders in the company, listed over here. And then policies and the governance documents, right? So what is the access control policy? What is the system communication? And what is the audit and accountability policy? And you can see that this is simply just the case study, right? So, the students will have to analyze this, right? Get the findings, and then you will have to develop another interactive that I actually have over here. Something like something like this, right? And then here is the here is the tool, to document itself, right? So first and foremost, they will decide over here, right? What is the assessment approach? So what are we going to do as a uh, uh, auditors, right? Are we going to just review the documents, right? Are we interviewing people? Are we testing the systems? Are we doing physical inspections? That's kind of hard to do, but I will be honest with you, that's for a lot of my students, that's a big gap in their understanding. A lot of my students, they think that, if is it not one and zeros, if is it not computer, it doesn't really it doesn't belong to them, right? It's not part of the cybersecurity audit. So the physical domain of the cybersecurity is often overlooked for my students, right? But they can just go and select and deselect, right? And then they will have to find what are the assets that are actually in scope of the audit over here, right? And they can add them. They can say that, hey, server is part of it, right? And it will just create the server, and they can say that the PC1 is part of it, right? And they just build the asset inventory over here. And then they will say, hey, what is actually the security protection assets, right? What are those? And once again, they will have to understand, they will have to, select them and input them over here, right? So it's more realistic. They will now almost have to have two screens because they need to see the case study, right, that I showed you before. And now they are just going through and actually filling up, the report, right, after they have clear understanding of what the company actually does. Yeah. And then it's the same old, right? They will have to fill the information over here and the authorization number, for them, right? And what is the certification status? Are they certified? Is this the first certification? Is it recertification, right? What is the assessment team members, right? And what are their roles over here? Do they have a certification ID? Because if you are actually doing it, if you truly are the assessor, right, the auditor, then you have an ID for yourself, right? And what years of experience you have. That's all part of the documentation that you actually need to do, right? And then of course the input, right? So for the SIR, right, you are looking on account management, wireless access, awareness training. All of these things are actually covered, right? So they will actually select it, and they will say, hey, was this met? Was this not? Was this applicable, right? Maybe we don't have the wireless, there is no wireless network, so hey, it's not applicable, right? And how did you actually make the decision, right? What was the artifact, or who did you talk to? What was the interview that actually made you believe that this is or isn't met or is not applicable, right? And as you add them, right, once again, you kind of put it together, right? And then the risk and impact analysis, that's the meat and potato, right? How do you actually decide, that this is worth, the enterprise should or should not get the certification in the first place, right? And what are the recommendations for the improvements over here, right? And then, you generate the final report, and this is what they will, once again, they can print it, download it, in CVS, just the findings, or actually download the PDF and they can, uh, uh, send it, right, as an assignment, right? But I mean, this is, kind of a two-step process, right? Develop the case study first, and then actually develop the document completely independent of the case study, if you will, right? You will just say, hey, guess what? Give me a template for the security assessment report, and the AI will actually generate just a generic report, right? And then the students will have to figure out how to fill the whole thing, right? Versus, if is it all contained now, the case study is essentially just, built, around that report. So, they can just go through and they can fill the report as they are going through the case study, right? So this is more involved, more realistic than the first one you can see, right? And I just put over here, once again, uh, if this is a lesson for the academia, right? I kind of wanna the students to have the reminder about what the security assessment report actually is, right? What is the holy trinity of documentation? Once again, it starts with the security plan, it goes through the assessment report, and of course there is the plans of actions and milestones. That's what we were talking about, right? I mean, that's the three-step process that was actually in that infographic. So students once again have that reminder of, hey, this is not, it doesn't live in a vacuum, right? You cannot just do a security assessment report and call it a day and say, hey, we are done here and everything is peachy, right? I mean, you need the system security plan to actually understand, right? Uh, uh, how, right? We will protect the data, right? Then you do the assessment itself to actually see what the reality of the situation is, and then of course you have that remediation at the end, right? To close the gaps, if you will, right? And then they can just go through those different sections of the report over here, right, and kind of understand what each of the section actually is, and why would you want the uh, why would you want to learn about it, right? And they can build this and they can move through it. So this is another way. I use a AI Studio for this one, right? Which AI Studio is just a Gemini that is actually a wrap, in some more tools. It creates a little nicer, I think, graphical interface here, right? I provide a little more information, to the prompt itself. So you can see that the prompt is more detailed over here, almost to the point. Like I'm almost following a John's lead over here. It's not a zero shot. It was more deliberate, more detailed to actually create that, right, and says that, hey, I did the research and now I have all the sections over here, right? It's the overview of that. Then it's the anatomy that was actually recommendations from the AI to put it over there. But then I go into the sections and I specifically says, hey, I want the executive summary to be there, and the uh, asset inventory and all of that, right? And I provide much more detailed about how this should be structured, than when we did the example over here, and we just play with the zero shot. Okay. Any questions, comments? Crystal clear. Is it all clear, or are you all lost and done? I know that Mikey is ready to go. All right, that's really all I have for today. Now, I thought that we have what 20 minutes, 22 minutes to the top of the hour, right? If you want to go and you want to do like a zero shot, just just to see what these tools can do, right? Maybe not build the whole thing, but take one or the other, either the case study, start with the case study, or start with the document or the tool, one of them, you know, and just try to go to Claude, Gemini, AI Studio, even ChatGPT will actually do that. Now, if you have a subscription for something, that will work better. If not, the free one will actually do that for you. It's a Saturday, 1 o'clock, 1:40 Central, so there shouldn't be too much utilization on them, hopefully. So it will probably allow you to do that. But I thought that we can take maybe 15 minutes for you guys to try to just observe, right, what it will do, and then kind of look through it. And once again, you can just after it will create the I would say the draft or first version, whatever you want to call it, right? Maybe even ask the AI to analyze it, right, and give you recommendations about how to make it more realistic, right? And see what recommendations actually, what do you may think of for the next time when you run the prompt, because the recommendations, then if you are implementing them into your prompt, right, it will actually improve the product, on that zero shot. Okay. Yes, no, maybe.
Yes, I'll have to give it a try later on.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Yeah. I understand. It's yeah. But I will be on for next 15 minutes or so, and then so if you have questions or comments, just let me know. Okay. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you.